Hi. So apparently capitalism is dead and it's being replaced, not by socialism, but by something the ex-finance minister of Greece, Yannis Varoufakis, has christened Technofeudalism. So this is a review of a book called Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism by Yannis Varoufakis. But I want to begin with a story. And it starts in the late 90s when my family got our first internet connected computer, and I, for the first time, stepped into that wonderful realm of the imagination that was unpoliced. It was like a Wild West and like pregnant with opportunity and a place where you could hope and imagine a virtual anarchist utopia, the potential to become that. But of course, I wasn't thinking in those terms when I was 10 years old. I was just blown away by what this amazing thing was at the end of my fingertips. Anyone back then who had the relative privilege of access to the internet could access information and knowledge and be part of the process of creating this online culture in its earliest stages. And it felt very fair. And again, acknowledging that relative privilege of having internet access in the first place. But for those people who used it, it didn't feel hierarchical at all. And it felt like a commons because there was all this space and all this opportunity, and there was nobody telling you what you could and couldn't do. And while it hasn't turned out to be a virtual anarchist utopia, nor the medium to create an anarchist world in reality, I'm giving away my political leanings now. People haven't stopped dreaming. So there are like the crypto idealists, for example, who still dream of a world different from how I would personally like it to turn out, but who are still harnessing the possibilities of the internet in order to try to bring about the world that they want. But as the internet grew and developed, of course, just like the land in medieval times, a resource of such immense potential wasn't going to be left to the normal people to do with as they pleased. And we experienced the enclosure of that commons, and the normal people lost their grip on the internet, and it became much more homogeneous and dominated by a few big names. In addition to that, we spend a lot more time online. It's become a bigger part of our lives than it was, and facilitated by the fact that we all carry a pocket computer around with us nowadays. It feels like we're not as free anymore because we're corralled to the same places, the same big platforms that monopolize the space on the internet and different services provided by the internet. You could be as present as you pleased, whereas now there is almost an imperative to have a presence online on certain platforms like LinkedIn, for example, or just not to be left out of the loop socially. And in that sense, I suppose it's less fun as well. It doesn't feel as free. It feels like you kind of have to get on and even if you are receiving a dopamine hit, there is this kind of imperative to get on and catch up with everything. There are more paywalls now, but there are also many free services. Free on the face of it because nothing is really for free, and the currency that we pay a fee in is a currency that is of value to tech giants and private interests, and the rent that they wring from us is one denominated in our time and attention and our personal data. It doesn't take a great leap of the imagination to see how the feudal metaphor fits over the system that dominates on the internet at the moment. If the internet itself were the commons, then the tech giants who enclosed it are the feudal lords. And we who are existing under their great might and paying rent to them, even if it's in the form of our attention and data, we, unfortunately, are finding ourselves in the position of the serf. This is the view of the world that Yannis Varoufakis' book is premised on. Yannis Varoufakis rose to infamy in 2015 as Greek finance minister when he shirked the tacit rules of engagement during negotiations with the big European lenders during the Greek debt crisis. He didn't achieve the deal that he set out to secure for Greece, but which he considers a big failure in his career. But he is still very active in politics and academia and writes books. In Technofeudalism, Yannis Varoufakis structures his book around a question posed to him by his late father, Georgios Varoufakis, who, along with Yannis's mother, was a great influence on Yannis Varoufakis and his politics. Georgios Varoufakis was a communist who spent time in the Greek version of the gulags, a re-education camp on the island of Makronesos, for refusing to denounce his communist beliefs. Through a history of technology and Hesiod's poetry, Georgios taught the 6-year-old Yannis about the concept of capitalism. Before Georgios's passing, while Yannis was connecting his computer to the internet, he asked his son, now that computers talk to each other, I'm paraphrasing, now that computers talk to each other, will this make capitalism impossible to overthrow, or will it reveal its Achilles heel? And Yannis sat on this question for years before finally answering it, and that answer took the form of this book, Technofeudalism. So at the beginning of this video, I begun with the statement that capitalism is dead, and that was a little bit hyperbolic, but that is what Varoufakis does say over and over again, and maybe it's a little bit promotional, but it's essentially he's saying that capitalism's reign is already over. He isn't denying that it is still in existence and it is flourishing in its own way, but it no longer is the dominant form of our economy. Not just economy. I mean, this to make such a statement, it goes well beyond just saying that our economic system is changing. What he's saying as well is that the dominant ideology, political and social ideology as well as economic, is transforming into something else, or is being ousted by something else. Because if you think about it, everything we do, all our values, all the systems of our education, our whole way of structuring our society and bringing the resources that we need to us and distributing them, all of this, the breakdown of the natural world, the rate at which technology progresses is determined by this ideology, capitalism. These sour jellies and the dregs of my French press are going to keep me alert for the rest of this video. Yes, the coffee ban didn't last very long. In the first two chapters of the book, Yannis Varoufakis talks a little bit about his own personal background, his influences, his time as a Greek finance minister, and then about the history of capitalism and how certain events in the 20th century in particular set the stage for technofeudalism. The end of Bretton Woods really was like a trigger for a series of events, according to Varoufakis, that led to technofeudalism. An understanding of Bretton Woods and the Nixon shock that brought about the end of Bretton Woods is important because it sets the stage, according to Varoufakis, for neoliberalism, which was, according to him, just a kind of jerry-rigged, well, I shouldn't say jerry-rigged, but a theory of economics made after the fact, just crafted upon the financialization of capitalism. So after the crash in 2008, there was a lot of money and power in the finance sector. And the US had contrived a situation whereby the Wall Street was the finance capital of the world, and therefore the US was able to profit despite their trade deficit. And central banks printed a lot of money at that time to keep the banking sector afloat. All this printed money basically went to big companies who were able to profit despite the fact that there were austerity programs around the world for normal people, and the pandemic brought spending down, and yet these big companies were able to bloat on the money being printed by central banks. Yannis Varoufakis has an expression he uses very frequently, which is socialism for bankers and corporations and austerity for the rest of us, which is exactly what happened. And this is one of the pillars of technofeudalism, because profit was no longer king. Companies could grow without profit. They didn't need it anymore. And so this is the background under which technofeudalism has gotten a grip and is becoming the more dominant economic system of our time. Varoufakis doesn't believe that capitalism defines the current system that we're under, this current dominant system, because technofeudalism defies three of the main values of capitalism, which are the markets, the labour market, and profit. Profit is the main driver of society, of progress. So to give a little bit more time to each of these values and the ways in which technofeudalism seems to relegate them to a place of less importance or irrelevance. Number one, let's take the markets. So whereas once we sought products based on our needs and desires or authentic desires, or even advertising as conceived of in the era of Mad Men, now our desires are shaped by machine networks and cloud capital. And so we have advertising, of course, like we always did, but Varoufakis claims that this is completely different. It's a different form. It's algorithmic. We also have devices in our homes like Alexa and Google Home, and they train us to train them to understand what they can sell us. And these devices in our homes that are training us and listening in on us, Varoufakis describes as portals to a totalitarian, fully centralized system of preference creation and satisfaction. This system has devised a method of bypassing the market in this sense. You could say that the market has kind of been thrown out of that central place, that has been evicted from the epicenter of our economies. The second value, capitalist value, that has been relegated or made irrelevant is labour markets. And so obviously the trade of labour is very central to the idea of a capitalist system. Under technofeudalism, we have been enslaved to sustain this gigantic behavioural modification machine. They've been able to do this by monopolising the internet, positioning themselves so as to be kind of essential to many aspects of our lives, whether social or cultural or just seeking information or professional. And in this way, they have been able to ensure that millions upon millions of people work for them for free. And of course, he likens this to the role of serfs in feudal times, because serfs were in many ways unfree, had to labour for their lords for no pay and just for the right to exist on the land on which they lived. And when we work for the tech giants themselves and we do receive a wage, then he defines us as proles. This new system, technofeudalism, is changing the idea of what constitutes a commodity. Now our personal lives become a commodity. And in this sense, that changes our very identity too, because of the commodification of ourselves online. And of course, this permeates out into our real life. What happens online doesn't stay online necessarily. Our political landscape and our culture are changing as a consequence of technofeudalism, and the who gets elected and how we envision the world. Our behaviour and our views are manipulated by these feudal lords who have so much power over us and can polarize us if they want to. And so in this sense, Varoufakis argues that the labour market is being transformed into something very different. So the third value that is being attacked is profit. And this is partly because technofeudalists themselves haven't required profit in recent years in order to grow wealthy because of their feeding of central banks. And then in addition to this, the method that they run under is one that generates rent more than profit. Capitalists require a space on the 100% privatized transactional platforms created by technofeudalists. And sometimes the fees that they pay to technofeudalists can be 40%. I think that's what it is on Amazon. Capitalists are no longer at the top. They're still in existence. They're still generating profits, but they are subservient to the technofeudal lords. And in that sense, they've been turned into vassals dependent on those lords and paying a rent to them. So Varoufakis also talks about some of the implications that this new system has for our world in other areas. like in terms of how we tackle the climate crisis, in terms of geopolitics and peace in the world. And one of the things he focuses on is the new Cold War with China, which was instigated by Trump when he banned the use of Android on Huawei phones. And even when Biden got into power, he continued this antagonistic approach to China by trying to curb the development of their technologically advanced economy by restricting the sale of semiconductors to China. And according to Varoufakis, tensions between the US and China over Taiwan and the South China Sea were just really a cover for the US's true concern, which is the maintenance of US hegemony. Varoufakis argues that the US's behavior is kind of further evidence of technofeudalism because the US recognizes how cloud capital has usurped terrestrial capital, and it's of more importance now in deciding who the superpowers of the world are. And China's cloud capital, Varoufakis argues, is far more advanced than the cloud capital of the US. And when the US decided to start the new Cold War, they bifurcated the world between these giant cloud fiefs, these two, China and the US, and they jeopardized our chances of a global coordinated effort to tackle global problems like the climate crisis. So in chapter 7, part 1 and part 2, Varoufakis turns to the challenge of overthrowing the techno-feudal giants and creating a more desirable future for the majority of people on Earth. And I want to give a fair amount of time to this because although I think analysis is essential groundwork, solutions are the really juicy stuff, the really exciting stuff. And so Varoufakis begins to paint at the end of the book an alternative reality. And there's another book that he wrote called A New Now. And I think this chapter 7 draws a lot of the ideas from that other book, which I haven't read yet. And Varoufakis is not anti-markets. He identifies as a liberal Marxist. So you might think that he just wants total centralized control, but not at all. That's not the kind of future that he's envisioning. At the center of his alternative reality is the democratized company. And in these alternative companies, which do exist in the world already, and one such example would be Mondragon, whenever you're hired into a democratized company, you receive a share, and nobody else can buy shares. You have to work under the company in order to own a share. And everybody gets one. And this share also functions as a vote that you get to use on various different decisions made for the company. Like, for example, voting on a variety of different proposals to tackle a problem or to grow the company in the next quarter or whatever. And so the shareholders' assembly is made up of employees alone, no outsiders. And there isn't necessarily equal pay. Instead of equal pay, you get tokens that you can, say 100 tokens or whatever, that you can distribute during a work year based on who you think contributes the most to the company. Varoufakis argues that this wouldn't be a popularity contest because your share and your profit and the company's health, you've got much more of an investment in that because you're not just receiving a flat wage. The company's welfare is very much in your interest. So you will distribute these tokens based on who you genuinely think contributes the most to the company. The proportions that you're going to allot to, say, R&D or fixed costs or bonuses or basic pay, all of that's decided by the shareholders, aka the employees. Obviously, I can't go into all of the nitty-gritty in a video review like this. It'll get far too long. All you need to know is that he paints this very comprehensive vision of an alternative reality where we are at the center and power's been given back into normal people's hands. So Varoufakis believes that just like it has in history, that collective action can be the answer to overthrowing the techno-feudalists and creating a better future for us all. And this will be accomplished through cloud mobilization, and which is because there's so many of us online, the personal sacrifice would be minimal and the potential rewards could be almost universal. And he thinks that the proles and the serfs under this system have to come together. And what he means by that is that the people work, like there would have to be a union of trade unions internationally who would, for example, just decide not to come into work at Amazon for a day. And this would have to be coupled with the serfs, the users of Amazon, just not using that site for a day. And he thinks that would be enough to drop the share prices, enough to hurt Amazon, that we'd be able to carry our message across and regain control with like various coordinated, concerted efforts like this. Now, I don't know whether I find that convincing or not, and whether I think that even can be, whether we can rally people to be that coordinated, but to convince them that there's anything wrong with Amazon, it's a very tall order, but we have to dream in order to do anything ambitious. When encountering criticism of technofeudalism, what killed capitalism, it became glaringly obvious to me that there are huge gaps in my knowledge of the history of politics and the history of economics. And just there was a lot of esoteric knowledge there. So I don't personally feel qualified to critique his work and or to give more or less weight to any of the criticisms or the praise for Varoufakis' work. But just to give you a little bit of an overview, there was a general sense that those on the left felt defensive against this idea that the enemy, capitalism, may not be the enemy anymore, that their traditional ideas may be incorrect, and they've been fighting against this enemy for their whole lives maybe, and it's now things are changing and they're going to have to adapt to a new enemy, right? And there did often seem to be a bit of a like grasping at trying to find ways in which Varoufakis's analysis didn't hold true. Like, for example, nitpicking around definitions of serf and prole, and that, you know, they're not exactly the same as medieval times, because in medieval times, serfs didn't have any rights at all, you know, whereas you can leave YouTube whenever you want and go to Vimeo, so I think sometimes they were taking the metaphor too literally, more than it needs to be in order to work as a definition of the current system. But again, this could be my ignorance speaking. At times, though, I think the criticisms did seem to be focused more around the idea that if a lot of these comparisons don't hold true, if proles really aren't as Varoufakis describes them, well, then it's not a good depiction of reality. And then it could be argued that he's stretching the metaphor in order to define the new system as technofeudalism, when it is in fact better characterized as a new form of capitalism. Some people seemed to mock his characterization of devices like Alexa, giving them too much of a sinister air, like the idea that they could manipulate our minds, and they'd rather say that these are just, this is just technology facilitating good old advertising, that it's just another way of bringing advertising into the home and nothing more. I do take issue with that, because although you could say traditional advertising is manipulative, maybe they're in the early stages, devices like Alexa, and they aren't quite there where we feel like they're really brainwashing us, right? With the development of much more advanced artificial intelligence, it's not implausible to think that in the near future they will have a greater grip on us. And others criticize Varoufakis by calling him premature to jump to the conclusion that because certain companies took advantage of stimulus packages doled out to them by central banks and profit was relegated to a position of lesser importance, that therefore it's the end of capitalism and we're moving into an entirely new system. And of course that's kind of creating a straw man, because Varoufakis is giving further evidence. He's not relying entirely on the stimulus packages to argue that profit isn't that important anymore. He does say that the main source of growth for companies now in terms of their what they do on the internet is from rent, that they're just providing a space rather than generating profit. But then there are other critics who are saying, well, no, why is this other than profit? They argue that offering better user interface or better algorithms or better AI is just another way of competing in a market. It's not a product, but in a physical sense, like an iPhone or something, but it's still a user experience that they are generating, and we get to choose whether we like the user experience on this platform or this other platform. So it's up to you to decide. If you decide to read this book, you can decide for yourself. Do you think that what we are seeing the tech giants doing is more like technofeudalism or more like just monopolies, monopolies taking on a different form in the virtual world? So the last little point I want to make before closing is that I'd love to see a discussion between Varoufakis and a crypto idealist, because Varoufakis touches on the idea of cryptocurrencies. Although he admires blockchain technology, he largely dismisses cryptocurrency as a solution to the problem of technofeudalism as he defines it. I just think it would be so interesting to let a cryptocurrency idealist have an opportunity to respond to some of his criticisms and to offer their criticisms of his ideas. This is one of the things that I like about Varoufakis is that although he's deeply steeped and was raised in the traditions of the left, he's capable of adjusting his beliefs to a changing world. He's open to talking with people anywhere on the spectrum, pretty much, or at least as long as they're somewhat rational and civilized. I think that he has something to offer because his analysis overlaps with some of the ideas, say, of libertarians, although they have very different solutions to a problem that they both recognize as such. I think that it could be intriguing for somebody, say, who is libertarian to read Varoufakis' ideas and at the very least, just to, even for the sake of critiquing them or to get a clear understanding of their own way of looking at the world. I do think that it might appeal to people who find themselves on that part of the spectrum. I gave the book 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads because although I'm not sure that I'm convinced by his analysis of our current world, I did find his book to be very digestible, given that the topics are quite abstract, and also because he's just so ambitious. The ideas are so original, and I think that he's being very bold in putting out this new idea. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. I'm just a tadpole in the big pond that is YouTube, so it really boggles the mind for me that anybody would watch my videos and stick to the end of a lengthy video. It's just, thank you so much. If you're one of my special people who'd like to read fascinating books alongside me, or who thinks that some of the recommendations might be to your taste, please consider subscribing to this channel and or liking this video. Till next time, stay well, stay curious, and stay reading. Bye.